Detroit's public schools are ground zero for debates about urban education in Michigan. Graduation rates are slowly rising, but enrollment continues to fall, and the quality of education and safety of students is still constantly in question. What will it finally take to make DPS a world-class school system? Detroit superintendent, school board president, and emergency financial manager will be here to discuss on American Black Journal.
Lindsay wants to know.
So I'm curious, what's DTE Energy doing to improve their customer service?
Why don't we take a ride over there and let Rachel tell us? Hello.
Hello. Take a walk with me. Here at DTE Energy, we're working very hard to improve our service, like answering every call under 1 minute and resolving the issue on the first call.
Wow, no passing the buck, huh?
Nope. And plus, we're adding over 100 customer service jobs right here in the state of Michigan.
I need to get a real job.
I'm going to send your application.
Thanks, Rachel. DTE Energy. Know your own power.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. Right before the holidays, a judge ordered the Detroit Board of Education and emergency financial manager Roy Roberts to resolve their disagreements. For several years, both sides have gone head-to-head over academics and finances in the school system. The elected school officials preside in exile, unable to manage day-to-day operations or even implement policies. The emergency manager has had control of the entire system, and now 15 schools are under the control of the Education Achievement Authority, a state-run district for chronically low-performing schools. Joining me to talk about this today and how it will all sort itself out are both sides. First up, Dr. John Telford, who's the superintendent of Detroit Public Schools, and Lamar Lemons, who's the president of the Detroit Board of Education. Welcome to ABJ. You know, when I think about what I hear from you guys and your supporters, there's one word that comes to mind more than anything else, and it's frustration. Talk to me about what it is you feel frustrated about and sort of how we get past that.
Well, I can speak for myself, and I know Lamar will probably say similar things, but my frustration has been basically that for the past almost 7 months now, I have been superintendent in name only. I have been superintendent on paper. I've done some ceremonial things, and I've done some things that have been supportive of the kids on a very peripheral basis. But basically, I'm not running the school district.
Right.
I'm not sure Mr. Roberts is running it either. I think some of his appointees are running the school district.
But isn't that the way it's supposed to work under an emergency financial manager, that he is the one who's in charge and you guys get sort of pushed to the side while he fixes the finances?
Actually, no. The fact is, I'm supposed to be in charge of academics.
Of academics in the system.
I'm running the academic side of the house as best I can. We were directed by Judge John Murphy to cooperate in managing the schools. But it really hasn't worked out that way. Mr.
Right.
Roberts still regards himself not as the emergency financial manager, but as the emergency manager.
Under the law that was put down by voters in November.
Yeah, well, even before that, and I'll let Lamar speak to that.
Sure.
But before that, we got that. The board got that turned over. That
Right.
he would not be that Mr. Robert Bob would not be emergency manager.
Right.
He would be emergency financial manager. And there's a significant difference in responsibility.
Well, what you should know is that we had what's called the Baxter decision, Judge Winnie Baxter,
Right.
which gave a irreparable harm judgment to the district because of the overreach of the previous emergency financial manager. And I would say that Roy Roberts' overreach has been even more egregious than that of Robert Bob, if that can be imagined. And first of all, your viewers, I'd be remiss if the viewers didn't know that the financial deficit that created the emergency financial manager was created by the state and the state's intervention. We had a surplus of $94 million, $40 million a rainy day fund, and a $1.5 billion bond. When they returned the district, all the money spent, and with a $250 million
Right,
deficit.
but it was also true that the state floated bonds to cover that deficit, and when the board got control back, the table was reset, and the board got itself back.
That is not true.
That is true.
No, that is not true. You'll have to do your due diligence. The
deficit that was accumulated in 2009 when Jennifer Granholm appointed the emergency manager was accumulated by the school board.
No.
Yeah, well, it was. I mean,
It was not. It was not. I'm the president of the board now, and I've lived. So that's a misnomer, and we can document and show that it was the deficit was created by the Public Act 10, and so the bonds, that deficit, that bonds that were floated, it's not like they went away. That's the bonds that the citizens, and that's 200 of the 274 million that we now own. That now that the Roy Roberts has placed has refinanced, but we still owe that 200 million and an additional 700 million. Also, you should know that it is not the emergency managers, financial managers, deliberately, in our estimation, prolong the financial emergency. We know that we could rectify it. Well,
how could you and that was that's what I want to get to. I mean, I think it's one thing to go back and sort of try to talk about who did what and who's responsible for what. I used to cover this district 20 years ago for the Free Press. It was a terrible district then. It was in financial trouble. It was in academic doldrums.
In '99 it wasn't.
Well, that's not true. 30% graduation rate in 1999.
Okay, let me say
48% of the kids couldn't pass the MEP in 1999. That's not anywhere close to an acceptable rate.
I agree. It's totally unacceptable. However, our test scores were in the middle of the state.
Right at the midpoint.
So it
Actually,
says
they were all far below state average, and the gap between Detroit and the state average was wider than it was in almost any other district at that time.
Okay. Well, we
again, it's one thing to go back and try to rehash who did what when and who's responsible for what. I think it's a little more interesting though to talk about how do you fix it now? And you're saying you could fix the financial problem. Now, as I see it, the financial problems that the district has right now are about students. School districts don't have a way to raise money other than by getting students. You get your per pupil allocation, and that's your money. If you continue to lose students, how do you balance the book?
Actually, we've increased students.
1 year.
Yeah, yes. Right. Because what's happening is the people are being trying charter schools and find out they don't work, and they come back to our district. In many cases, after the fourth Friday count.
That's happened. Yeah,
so that's number one. Number two is we've jettisoned 10,000 students or 11,000 students into the EAA, which makes it more difficult for us to
And you say jettison, but those kids were in schools that have underperformed for how long?
Well, the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And under those last 3 years, we've had emergency financial.
But those were bad schools long before that 3-year period.
Again, it could have took action to intercede. Remember, the state has had control over the district 11 of the last 13 years.
Sure.
And so
over the last 14.
So 11 of the right. And so as a result, I mean, it's only a K-12 system. At what point does the state say our interference is exacerbating the situation?
Right. And so what's the question? The question, though, is what do you do to fix it? For the 50,000 kids that you have now in DPS, what would deliver for them the level of education that they're entitled to under the state constitution?
Well, first of all, we have to have smaller class size. That would be
I'm sorry, I can say that again?
Smaller class size.
Well,
we have schools with 40 and 50 kids in the class. Not enough. I mean, they're packed in. One teacher came to the district meeting last night and analogized it as a slave ship because there was no room for even a student to turn around.
Sure, and the class sizes are about that per pupil. I mean, you've got 50,000 kids in a system that once held, when I covered it, 184,000 kids. Right. It's shrunk. That's almost 2/3 of it. That's gone. Actually, more than 2/3.
But in the city, we have about 120,000 students, so we have to recapture our market.
You have to recapture it, and I guess that's the question: is how do you do that? How do you say to parents who've watched the system underperform for as long as it has, that they ought to reinvest, that they ought to send their kids to the public schools rather than the other schools that they're choosing?
We have to make the schools safe.
Okay.
That's the first step. The second step is that we have to recover some of the kids who aren't going to any school. There are thousands of kids who are on the street. They're not going to charter schools. They're not going to EAA. They're not going
anywhere.
They're just not going anywhere.
Right.
We've got to get those kids back. Once we get those kids back, we have to ensure that they behave. And also we have to ensure that the misbehaviors that we already have in the schools are behaving, because we have a serious problem in that regard. One of the ways that can happen is that some of those kids need to go into alternative settings. And we have to surround them with social workers, with remedial teachers, with principals who care, good tough principals.
All of these things you're talking about make a lot of sense, and they're the same kinds of things that I would hear from Roy Roberts or from state officials. Why, I guess the question is, how come? What do we have to get all of you guys working on the same page here?
Well, we've got a consistent disagreement with Mr. Roberts regarding the EAA.
Right.
Those schools never should have been jettisoned or
what should have been done with this?
They should have been reconstituted.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Well, that's what happened to them.
No, actually, they took schools and kept the same principal. Denby,
in one case.
No, Phoenix.
Yeah.
So we have at least two schools.
Central.
Two schools that did not require. Two schools that did not meet the qualifications, but they jettisoned them anyway.
And the schools, all of the schools in the EAA, the principals had to apply through a very rigorous process and be vetted.
Selected by whom?
And selected by the management of EAA. And you know, I guess you can quibble with that, but
it's taxation without representation, because the management of the EAA was selected by someone outside, and yet I have to pay taxes for that.
Well, but you're a member. You're a citizen of the state.
Well, I'm a citizen, but I'm taxed locally. If the state just came in and said we're going to take our 6% and we get to direct that, you'd have no. But we have millages. You mentioned that the taxes are no. We just passed another millage.
Right.
That I sat down and we did work together to get that millage.
Sure.
Because for the first time there was a vocal opposition to passing a millage in the city of Detroit.
And the millage is for capital. I mean,
right.
the
millage.
That's not operating money. You can't raise operating funds that way.
Exactly.
Schools. That was my point about schools not having the kind of maneuverability that a city would have, for example, in raising tax revenue in another way. And that gets back to that fundamental question, which is how do you make a school district of 50,000 work in a city that once housed 184,000 kids? I mean, I continue to wonder what it is that we need to be doing that will make the school system viable.
Well, Steve, I just told you, and it actually should be easier. But you know, and you say we shouldn't look back at the history, but when Robert Bob left, we had a $350 million deficit. When he came in, there was a $250 million deficit.
Right.
He was an emergency manager, then an emergency financial manager. He was supposed to balance the budget. Instead, he put us $100 million more in debt.
Right.
As a matter of fact, Roy Roberts always talks about what the condition he found the district, but what he neglects to say that the person that it was his emergency manager predecessor that left that with all those departments and people reporting to him and that chaos, that was done by his emergency manager predecessor.
Okay,
he neglects to say that.
But if you look at it this way, the way to fix that deficit is to stop spending, correct? Stop spending the money. If you stop spending the money, you increase class sizes, right? And you do the things that are driving people
Steve.
out of.
I disagree.
We're bloated. We're bloated administratively.
Always has been.
We're bloated administratively.
More than we've ever been.
And speaking of that, Robert Bob spent $10 million on communication budget,
right?
And Roy Roberts has spent $3 million on a communication budget. That money could be diverted into reducing class size.
We've got
we don't need PR.
We've got about 30 seconds left in the interview. Tell me what a year from now the partnership will look like, or if there will be a partnership between the school board and the superintendent and the emergency manager, or are we in for just more of this this disagreement?
Well, I'm going to say, and I'm just speaking for myself as a citizen of Detroit, I'm going to say that there should not be an emergency manager or an emergency financial manager. There never should have been a takeover. The governor would do something very statesmanlike if he just put Lamar Lemons in the board and me in charge of the schools. You know, tell Mr. Roberts thank you for his services, and let us fix the situation.
You want to fix it on your own,
yeah, absolutely.
But that's not a realistic option. He's not going to do that.
Well,
so the question becomes, if Roy Roberts stays, which he's likely to do, how do you become an effective partner, or do we just have this disagreement?
Well, actually, it depends. Everything depends on what happens in the courts, and so we'll if after March 27th, and we still have an emergency manager at that point, then Roy Roberts will continue, and we'll wait be patient
Okay.
and be a board in waiting again, which we've been most of my tenure, quite frankly.
Okay. Well, it was great to have you guys here. I would definitely want to have you back because there's way more to talk about with Detroit Public Schools. DPS's Emergency Financial Manager, Roy Roberts, joins me when we return with more American Black Journal. The primary job as an emergency manager is to set the route for the school district to get past its financial crisis and then return governance to the elected board. We're several years into the process in the Detroit Public Schools. When will we see the achievement that state intervention first promised more than a dozen years ago? Happy to have DPS's Emergency Financial Manager, Roy Roberts, back with us on ABJ.
Good to be with you.
As I said in the intro there, it's been more than 12 years, really, since the state first decided to intervene in Detroit Public Schools. If you look at the indicators across that time, we still have a deficit. The enrollment has dropped from almost 180,000 kids to just over 50, I think, this year. What would you say to a Detroit parent about what the positive impact has been of state involvement in Detroit Public Schools?
I think we ought to be clear about in that 10-year period, it wasn't just the state's involvement.
Sure.
It was the local districts also.
The local district had the control for 2 or 3 years of that.
That's right. And everybody was at fault. But if I concentrate on the past, I won't get to the future.
Sure.
I've got 50,000 kids in front of me right now that deserve the best education that we can give them. And I think there's more opportunity ahead of me than behind me. So I would just tell people that the school board made mistakes, the state potentially made mistakes, the unions potentially made mistakes, and my predecessors. But I can't do anything about that.
But you can't fix that.
I can't fix that.
Right.
I can fix this school district, we can educate kids, and we can fix this deficit. And I think we've gone farther than anybody have gone in 10 years toward that end objective.
Give me 2 or 3 headlines that you think would be the signature achievements of the time that you've been here. You came in May of 2011.
That's correct.
We're coming up on about 2 years this May. What would you say is the Roy Roberts message about this is what I've gotten done?
I think very importantly, the deficit was $327 million.
When you got here?
When I got here. Today it's $76 million. We didn't do that on the backs of people. We did it by being smarter business people, selling long-term bonds, getting rid of that, canceling contracts that were erroneous, fixing that piece of it. Academically, we've moved in every element. We're starting to move the academics up. It takes a longer time to do it. Sure. You need a degree of stability to get there. That's moving in the right direction. I'd also tell you that there were some laws passed that gave us the opportunity to put the best teachers, the most qualified teachers in front of every student. We've done that. So I'm really pleased with the moves that we've made and the improvement we made academically, because
Sure.
at the end of the day, that's the piece that really counts.
That's what really
You've
matters.
got to educate the young people. I've got a full staff of people. I didn't have that. I had 31 people reporting to me, and over half of them were contractors working part-time. We've got that out of the system. And when you look at the full staff, it's made up of people who have deep Detroit roots, every one of them, and they're uniquely qualified to do a job, and the accountabilities are in place, and we're holding people accountable. I'll tell you something else. We haven't had one crisis in our school district since I've been here.
And by crisis, you mean?
Blow-ups, people doing something wrong, somebody stealing big numbers.
Right, the kind of headlines we used to see pretty regularly out of the school district.
And we've got parents that are working with us. We got ministers that are working with us. We got community people who are working with us, and it's made all the difference in the world.
Right. One party that doesn't seem to be able to work with you and doesn't maybe want to is the elected school board and the superintendent, who I interviewed in the first segment. I started that segment by saying to them that one word that I would think describes their demeanor best is frustration. They said that frustration is about your presence in the district and your unwillingness to let them manage the academics in the district. What's your answer to that?
My answer is simple. I don't make the law, I follow the law.
Okay.
The law said, and the Judge Murphy said recently, that I have responsibility for financial,
right,
and I have physical responsibility for the district.
Right.
They have the academic piece. and he said we can't even draw a bright line between anything you could do on the academic side that wouldn't touch financial. So when they try to do something on the academic side that touch on financial,
There's a financial implication.
it's got financial implications. I got to stay focused on how do you get rid of this deficit and return this district to local governance.
Right.
And we just have a difference of opinion because I don't think they're bad people, and I would hope they wouldn't think I'm bad people, but I can't get them to agree that our focus ought to be on educating 50,000 kids.
Right.
And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of my energy talking about Engler and other people 10, 15, 20
The
years
things
ago.
that happened before.
It doesn't make any sense.
One of the complaints that lots of people seem to have about the schools right now is the class size. In some cases, we have 40. You hear reports of 50 kids in a class. Is that a function of, the district's shrinking, obviously? You continue to lose students most years. Is that just because that's what we can afford at this point, is 40 or 50 kids in a class?
Part of that, and part of that's logistics. Any young person in the city of Detroit can opt to go to any school they want. And
Right.
even though we set up periods for them to sign up way before school start, a lot of them don't do it or will move two or three times when school starts. So you get overcrowded. And you can't shift it that fast. So you go through a leveling process, and it is based on finance and what you can afford to do. And I think when people say they're 50 or they're 40, that's really unusual.
Okay.
And if we have that, guess what? We address it. And we'll move aggressively to check it and level the classes out and get teachers in front of students.
Right. But ultimately, the solution to all this is attracting kids back to DPS from the charter schools that have sprouted up in the city, from private schools, and of course we still have lots of people just leaving the city altogether for the suburbs and other places. How do we get to that space in Detroit?
You just nailed it. It's odd to me that people could come together for 10 or 15 years and put together a plan to lose.
Right.
Put it together and say, next year, if I make this happen, I'm going to lose.
Right.
We came together this year as early as yesterday, and we're doing strategic planning on how do we turn this around. I tell you, this year, we got about 1,600 kids back from charter schools. We got about 1,500 back from surrounding school districts. So people are starting to believe that we're doing some things right. But we got to go further than that. We got to say, what is our plan of attack? We got to go on offense, not just defense, because we got a ton of things that are really good in Detroit school system, and we have a number of things that we offer that no other school district in the state of Michigan offer. So we got to go after, and we got to play to win,
right?
Not to lose.
What's the ideal number? You know, I used to cover city schools for the Free Press 20 years ago. There were 180. I think 4,000 kids at that point. We're down to 50,000. Obviously, the city's lost a lot of population over that time. What is the ideal number, though, or the ideal size of this district? Is it realistic to say it'd be 75 or 100,000, or has the city just shrunk to the point where something like 50 or 60,000 is about where we're going to be?
I think with good work and people believing in the district and great performance, 60,000 plus can be a good number. But I think what we have to, and you said a piece of it, the population have shrunk.
Sure.
The auto industry settled this district, and when they went financially upside down, they desettled it, and people left, and they took their kids with them.
Sure.
Okay? So you got to track that. And a lot of charter schools have opened up. A lot of other schools have opened up. My attitude is that can be a good thing because nobody should have a monopoly on these kids. We should all compete. The reason General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler is doing well today is because there's a Toyota and a Honda that will eat their lunch, their breakfast,
that are
dinner.
driving them to greater excellence.
And when we compete, kids win. And that's what we should all want.
So you welcome that competition?
I welcome the competition. Right. I'm not going to walk away from it. I love competition.
Right.
That's been my life. It's made me better.
You know, we've got about 2 minutes left. I want to get to the idea of this cooperative relationship that the judge said that you should have with the school board. I don't have a lot of optimism about that, even though I think it's probably the best thing for the city, given that eventually the elected officials will take over again. How do we get to that point where you can be working with Dr. Telford and Lamar Lemons, who's the school board president, to manage the system together so that they're ready to take it back over once you leave?
That cut both ways. To dance, you got to have a dance partner. I have reached out to the school board and tried to have a meeting with them. The president said no, and some of his members. Some of the members said yes, and some came. And we told them everything going on in the district, okay? I had lunch with the president this week, and we've agreed we're going to have some more lunches and look for ways that we might work together, because the judge was clear. You're leaders in this community. You don't need to show kids negative things.
Right.
And I think he's exactly right. I didn't need a judge to tell me that. I know I don't have the right to show young people that. If we do, they'll grow up and do negative things, and we'll have somebody on the line talking about homicides.
Right.
We don't need that. I want to be positive, and I want to impact young people in a positive sense. So I'm trying. I'm reaching out. It's got to go both ways. And they said in the media that they want respect. I don't have a bushel of respect. You can't
You're not
give
carrying
it.
that around
You got to
with
earn
you,
it.
right?
You got to earn it.
Right. So a year from now, your contract is up in May. I'm assuming that either you will stay or we'll have some other emergency manager. What do we look at in terms of that? 20 seconds left. What do we look at in terms of that relationship? Is it better or worse?
I think it's better. I think it has to be better. I think that has to happen in the entire city. I'm going to work as hard as I can, and I believe they'll put forth effort.
Okay.
We'll move forward.
All right. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to my guests, and thanks for joining us. We will see you next time on American Black Journal.
Lindsay wants to know,
So I'm curious, what's DTE Energy doing to improve their customer service?
why don't we take a ride over there and let Rachel tell us? Hello.
Hello, take a walk with me. Here at DC Energy, we're working very hard to improve our service, like answering every call under 1 minute and resolving the issue on the first call.
Wow, no passing the buck, huh?
Nope. And plus, we're adding over 100 customer service jobs right here in the state of Michigan.
I need to get a real job.
I'm going to send your application.
Thanks, Rachel. DTE Energy. Know your own power.